I'm very happy to welcome Joan Ockman here to SCI-Arc. I've just discovered it's 10 years since you were in Los Angeles last, so let's not make it so long to the next visit. For everyone, Joan is currently the Distinguished Senior Fellow at the University of Pennsylvania School of Design. Previously, she directed the Buell Center for the Study of American Architecture at Columbia from 1994 to 2008, and was a faculty member at the school for more than 20 years. She has also taught at just about every other school you've heard of, including Harvard, Yale, Columbia, the Cooper Union, the Berlage Institute, and the State University of Buffalo, where she held an honorary chair in 2007, or SUNY New York, Buffalo would be more correct. She's the author or editor of several quite important books, including Architecture Culture, 1943 to 68, the anthology Architecture, Criticism, Ideology, the Pragmatist Imagination, Out of Ground Zero, Architecturism, the Forum book series, which included a text by P.V. Orelli, who spoke here not so long ago, and most recently, Architecture School, three centuries of educating architects in North America. She's been published in every journal you've ever heard of, including Art Forum, Assemblage, Any, Architecture, A+U, Architecture Viva, and Arch Plus, just to name the A's. And she's been in a bevy of anthologies, including Beatrice Colomina's Architecture Reproduction, which I'm not sure that's how you say it, but it's all one big word. And I'm very happy to say my own collection, the Light Construction Reader, from about 10 years ago. All this work has earned her awards from the AIA, the Graham Foundation, and elsewhere, and as well as a fellowship from the International Center for Advanced Study at NYU. Now, I could certainly go on. There's plenty more where that came from, but if I did this, there would really be no time left for the lecture. Before I do turn it over to Joan, I wanted to just say a few words about the contributions that she's made, particularly to the discourse of architecture. Joan got her start in the field at the Institute of Architecture and Urban Studies in New York in the 1970s, where she really had a significant hand in shaping both Oppositions, the influential journal that the institution put together from the mid-70s to the mid-80s, and then also Oppositions Books, the series for which she served first as copy editor and then later as executive editor. That series gave all of us access to the likes of Aldo Rossi, Adolf Loos, Moshe Ginsberg, Alan Colquhoun, and its distinctive orange volumes remain a common sight around the studios. I know you all are quite familiar with them. Later, she took it upon herself, and I'm sure she's heard this cheap line 1,000 times, she took it upon herself to literally write the book on architecture culture. It was called Architecture Culture, 1943 to 68. I'm sure many of you own it, and if you've taken my class, you've been referred to it again and again. It was originally released in 1993. It's been reprinted 4 times since. I mean, for an architecture book to ever be reprinted is a big deal. To go into 4 is astronomically impressive, and it's going to be reissued yet again next year in a 20th anniversary edition. So if that doesn't make you buy it, you really need to rethink your priorities. The book, not only is it important because of its sort of obvious popularity, but it contains 74 influential texts by major figures ranging from Alto to Zevi. She pairs these with her own hugely informative texts or introductory articles and timelines that document specific or significant milestones throughout the post-war period. Together, these documents come together to elucidate the complex unraveling of the modern movement into the period that we now call postmodernism, which is a topic that Joan has devoted quite a bit of attention to. And the book, quite simply, is required reading for anybody who wants to understand the architecture of the 20th century. Her recent book, Architecture School, is similarly ambitious, and it attempts to document the still largely uncharted territory of architectural education in North America since the 19th century and into the present. Again, she gathers together a formidable collection of contemporary voices to tell the story. And in addition to her own treatment of post-war pedagogy, she ties the entire effort together with a very penetrating introductory text. So I think that's also a really fantastic collection. In these works, and in other works. I mean, throughout her career, Joan Ockman has really been tireless in her efforts to articulate architecture's complex political entanglements and ideological inflections, which you can get a little bit from the titles. In her work, architecture is shown never to exist autonomously in some kind of idealized vacuum, but rather always to operate in and through the myriad cultural and historical contexts that it occupies. In her work, nothing is taken for granted. A style is never a style. Taste is never reducible to simple personal preference, and design decisions have ramifications well beyond the contours of the object of study. Now, importantly, as all of these anthologies attest, in these works, one voice is rarely enough to tell the story. And I think, but it would be a mistake, I think, to see Joan's significance primarily as a compiler of super important compilations. Because even when you look at those compilations, what you see that there is a single voice that carries through all of these very significant voices that are in those texts. And it's that single voice that gives each of those collections the force and conviction for which they're rightly celebrated. And so I think we're very lucky tonight to have that voice here at SCI-Arc, and I'm now very happy to get out of the way so we can hear what she has to say. Please welcome Joan Ockman.
Thank you, Todd, for that very, very generous, really generous introduction. I'm delighted to be here. I've never been to SCI-Arc before, and I got a tour of this marvelous linear city that you have, and it looks like a spectacular place to be studying architecture. So tonight, I guess I should start with an apology. I had given a different lecture title to Scotty when he invited me. I should thank Scotty and Danny for their invitation too. And for those of you who are hoping to hear something about Siegfried Krakauer, a fascinating figure that you should know something about, including the fact that he's trained as an architect, it'll have to wait for another occasion. I went back to work I've been doing for a very long time, and I got into a kind of intellectual knot with the paper, and I just couldn't resolve something, and I just decided I needed to put it aside for another occasion. So I hope that you'll find this lecture of interest. So, and it's about a figure who is known, but maybe not well enough. So, an orchid in the land of technology. Mise en scène. A doorman wearing a top coat and hat ushers you in from the sunny sidewalk on Hammerikskade through two overhanging canopies, a double layer of plate glass doors, and a pair of black marble-clad piers. Abruptly, like Alice, you're elsewhere. The sound level in the lobby is a civilized murmur, absorbed by a dark gray-green acoustical ceiling perforated with rows of recessed spotlights. The illumination is diffuse and tenebrous. The main seating area is populated sparsely with upholstered egg chairs arranged on area rugs, overspreading a grid of Norwegian pavers. The pavers are a cool grayish white with rich veining, reflecting light from the ceiling. Guests recline here and there, languidly smoking and reading. Small groups converse around low round tables enlivened with fresh flowers in small vases. Off to your right, a metallic stair spirals into the ceiling like a three-dimensional question mark, beckoning you. And beyond, a glass wall with a diaphanous drapery screens some sort of garden into which natural light filters from above. In due course, you'll accept these invitations, but first to check in. Directly in front of you, on axis with the entry, is an alcove with elevators, also polished black marble, and to the left of it, a reception counter. You make your way across with your bags. A long box-like fixture hangs on slender standards above, spreading milky light onto the counter. The counter is veneered in wenge wood and has a velvety sheen. Here, where repose speaks in all, as Edgar Allan Poe recommended in his Philosophy of Furniture, where luxury, calm, and voluptuous reign, as Baudelaire promised in his Invitation au Voyage, Invitation to the Voyage, Danish modern meets Hollywood. Gone is your routine busyness, your shoddy bodily everydayness. You're in a tableau vivant of graceful and civilized hospitality, at once serene and sensuous. Like Greta Garbo in Grand Hotel, you swan, discreetly glamorous, ostentatiously anonymous. Songe à la douceur. You must imagine this now. The building about which we shall speak is, or was, one of the most exquisite creations of late modern architecture. It was, let us say, its swan song. Today, Arne Jacobsen's hotel for the Scandinavian airline system has been much altered by successive owners. It's now the property of a hotel chain. What remain intact are the outer shell, an evanescent curtain wall, rising 20 stories above a 2-story base into the Copenhagen sky, and a single guest room on the 6th floor. The latter has been meticulously or miraculously preserved, and with sufficient notice is available for booking. Admirers have invariably described the SAS building as the quintessence of late cool modernism, and above all, as a stringently controlled and clarified total design. In a profusely illustrated monograph published by Phaidon in 2003, entitled Room 606, the SAS House and the Work of Arne Jacobsen, the author, Michael Sheridan, has lovingly and exhaustively reconstructed the design process from the archival evidence, starting with the single extant guest room. Like his fellow commentators, Sheridan describes the building as a modern Gesamtkunstwerk, a complete environment, a unique synthesis of abstraction and naturalism. And Jacobsen's magnum opus was all that, but it was something more, or else. At SAS, the modernist ambiance of total design and layered transparency was carried to a limit point. Nor is transparency quite the right description for the extremely fine and poetically gradated relationships of materiality and immateriality, light and dark, light and heavy, that the building put into play. Liminality would be better. Prehistory. Commissioned by the flagship airline of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway to come up with a design scheme based on preliminary engineering studies of the site, Jacobsen, whose dates are 1902 to 71, began working on what was then called SAS House in 1955. At the time, he was in his early 50s and the most prominent modern architect in Denmark. His professional career had been launched in 1929, 2 years after he graduated from architecture school, with a winning competition project in collaboration with Flemming Lassen for a house of the future. Coincidentally, this was the same year Buckminster Fuller put forward his initial scheme for the Dymaxion House in the US. Erected as a full-scale exhibition pavilion, Jacobsen's exuberant vision of modern living was spiral-shaped, flat-roofed, and intermodal. Besides a garage and a boathouse, it had a personal helicopter pad and was heliotropically oriented to take advantage of the best sunlight. Among the ultra-modern conveniences it offered were windows that rolled down with a crank, as in a car, a doormat equipped with an exhaust fan to vacuum dirt off visitors' shoes, a pneumatic tube system for mail, a kitchen stocked with ready-to-eat meals, and even a flat-screen television, as seen in this interior drawing made ex post facto. Actually, Jacobsen seems to have had the projection of fine art more than sitcoms in mind. The note on the drawing reads, "Pictures on walls are transmitted via radio from painting collections to the television plate and can be changed according to preference." The beanbag furniture also appears to be well ahead of its time. Jacobsen's subsequent projects in the years leading up to World War II, including dwellings, commercial buildings, and public institutions. Among these were the Bella Vista housing complex in Klampenborg, a northern suburb of Copenhagen, 1931 to 34, its staggered balconies, a fluent essay in Corbusian plasticity, and the Stelling building in Copenhagen, 34 to 37, with a Mendelssohnian corner rounding on Gammeltorv Square. There was also the more classicizing Aarhus City Hall, 37 to 42, with Erich Müller, a concrete structure finely faced on the exterior with gray tan marble and crowned by a cage-like Italianate clock tower. A skylit interior atrium space was richly lined with varnished wood. Such projects connected Jacobsen to the trajectory of the Nordic master Gunnar Asplund, whose 1930 Stockholm exhibition had marked Scandinavia's belated acceptance of the modern movement and of the international style aesthetics of functionalism, or funkis, as it was called up there. Following 2 years of exile during World War II, when, as a Jew, Jacobsen was forced to flee in a rowboat to neutral Sweden, he returned to Denmark in 1945. From the late 1940s through the mid-50s, he added luster to his reputation with projects like the Soholm terrace housing, not far from the earlier Bella Vista project, and distinguished by its sawtooth roofline. He himself settled into the complex and, as an avid horticulturalist with a painterly eye, cultivated his personal garden. He also built the Munkegård Elementary School near Copenhagen, 1948 to 57, based on an ingenious grid plan of classroom pavilions and variably planted courtyards, and the tersely elegant Jespersen building in Center City, Copenhagen, 52 to 55, the immediate predecessor of the curtain wall at SAS. Another town hall in suburban Rodove, 1952 to 56, gave further evidence of his attentiveness to international developments. Eero Saarinen's General Motors Technical Center in Warren, Michigan had begun construction a few years earlier, and of his interest in lightweight structural expression. In 1952, the first in a series of lightweight sculptural chairs produced by the firm of Fritz Hansen appeared, the Ant, followed by the wildly successful number 7 3 years later. There were also a series of lighting fixtures and textile designs that alternated between abstract geometric patterns and naturalistic figuration. All these projects established the multi-talented Jacobsen as a synthetic designer with a career in many ways parallel to that of Saarinen or Charles Eames in the US. City within a city. The SAS Commission was the largest and most complex Jacobsen had received to date. His task was to design a multifunctional facility that combined a luxury hotel with an adjoining in-city airline terminal serving Kastrup Airport 20 kilometers to the south. Kastrup had been built in the late 1930s by Jacobsen's slightly older colleague Wilhelm Lauritsen, and was an exemplary work of both early Danish modernism and early airport design. Lauritsen was now in the process of renovating and updating it for the post-war era of air travel. SAS billed Jacobsen's concurrent project as a grand hotel for the jet age, estimated in 1958 at 30 million Danish crowns, about $4,300,000, and containing 275 air-conditioned guest rooms. It incorporated a panoply of public amenities, from formal and informal restaurants and lounges to shops selling furs and leather, porcelain, silver, and other high-end goods. and an air terminal, which was equipped with Europe's first electronic brain reservation system and included a travel agency, a bank, a car rental service, and a cocktail bar. A jet service station in the back of the hotel provided a depot for buses, a filling station, and above and underground parking for 300 cars. The first renderings of the complex were published in 1956. Criticism came swiftly. The hotel, which was initially called the Globe before being rebaptized the Royal Hotel, was going to be the tallest structure in Copenhagen. Perched at the end of an open railroad trench and occupying an awkward site that had long been deemed unbuildable, it was also located at one of the busiest intersections in downtown, in the downtown. The professional journal, Architekten, protested that the site had been chosen on the basis of purely commercial considerations. They wrote, "The business world, which brings in foreign currency, has more influence on the city council's urban plans than the urban planning experts." Local newspapers voiced concern that the building's massiveness would not only compromise the city's picturesque six-story skyline of medieval towers and spires, but overwhelm nearby Tivoli Gardens, Copenhagen's world-famous amusement park, located 1 block east on Vesterbrogade. Established in the 1840s, Tivoli Gardens had been planned by a Danish army lieutenant named George Carstensen at what was then the westernmost edge of Copenhagen, and constituted the first opening and modernization of the city's medieval system of walls and moats. Carstensen would subsequently go on to collaborate on the design of the New York Crystal Palace at the New York World's Fair of 1853. But we may note, apropos of SAS, that Tivoli, too, was based on the concept of a city within the city. It resembled an exotic miniature town with an oriental gate, high walls, and an intricate layout of streets and squares. Additional criticism of Jacobsen's design remarked on the resemblance of the tower and plinth partie to Lever House in Manhattan, completed by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill in 1952. Why, asked one critic under the headline, "New York in Copenhagen," should a Danish architect strive to imitate the American metropolis? Undeterred by the negative reactions, Jacobsen and his client went ahead with their scheme. But they were not unmindful of the site's complexities, nor of the different construction conditions pertaining to Denmark. Like its American model, the high-rise tower was turned at right angles to the base, but it was constructed of reinforced concrete, not steel, and supported on 3 giant piers anchored into subterranean bedrock. The tower's glass skin was the subject of literally dozens of studies. What ultimately resulted was an ethereal cladding of gray-green vision glass in alternation with bands of thin and similarly tinted but opaque glass panels. Despite the concrete structure, the vertical proportions of the glass grid, and the lightweight flush frame of anodized aluminum mullions, which had operable windows, and the unified coloration, gave the tower a more delicate appearance than its antecedent in New York. This led the American architectural critic, Henry Russell Hitchcock, in a review published not long after it opened, to fault its appearance as too dainty. But Jacobsen defended his solution as producing, quote, "the least dominating sort of building, and one that related harmoniously, even at the sacrifice of a certain gaiety, to the Copenhagen sky." The building's upper reaches appeared to dissolve at different times of day under the changing atmospheric conditions of northern light and the swift-moving clouds. At the same time, the darker-colored podium sat solidly on the lot line on 3 fronts, with a suite of shops accessible from both the street and the lobby on Vesterbrogade, animating the sidewalk. At night, the illuminated ribbons of windows afforded passers-by glimpses into the hotel's elegant second-story restaurant and other spaces. The airline terminal opened to the public in August 1959, and the Royal Hotel debuted the following July. As Herbert Weiskamp would elaborate in a survey of new international hotels published in 1968, the preceding decade had seen a major boom in hotel building. The post-war growth of commercial aviation, low airfares, and the flocking of droves of Americans to Europe and other parts of the world for purposes of both business and pleasure had created a lucrative market for mass tourism, and architecture was called upon to play a central role. The obsolescence and overcrowding of the grand hotels built early in the 20th century, the taste preferences of the new jet-set consumers, and the increasingly far-flung travel destinations in a rapidly globalizing world all contributed to a changed culture of travel. Chains like Hilton, incorporated in 1946, as well as franchises owned by the large airline companies and international developers, capitalized on the period's affluence. From Denver to Tel Aviv, Mexico City to Mauna Kea, Amsterdam and West Berlin to Athens and Istanbul, Dar es Salaam to Dhaka, a wave of new hotel construction made the post-war international style a common coin and an index of up-to-dateness. Pace-setting architects in the US, like SOM, I.M. Pei, Pereira and Luckman, Minoru Yamasaki, and William Tabler built successful international practices and partnered with local associates who became equally adept in catering to the new taste culture. The competing impulses of internationalism and localism played out in niceties of canopy, swimming pool, and brise soleil design. Above all, the new hotels responded to a desire for architectural spectacle. Weiskamp, the author of the survey I just cited, and a modernist architect who had worked for a while with Richard Neutra in LA, noted the hotel industry's rampant taste for, quote, decorative lushness. Commenting disparagingly on the preference for scenographic effects and highly choreographed spatial environments, all carefully calibrated by a new cadre of market researchers and interior designers to soothe and flatter the tourist, he noted the psychological seduction. And I'm quoting from his book, "The guest may enjoy the important entrance created for the important person he is. He may enjoy becoming enfolded into a more intimate situation as he approaches the registration area. He may enjoy being virtually surrounded with concern by the total environment based on a guest-oriented philosophy which is being sold to him," and so on. All that in a kind of sarcastically being said. From the ashtrays to the airport. At SAS, with its borrowed one-better Americanisms, Jacobsen played on all these cliches of the genre. Yet he pushed them to such a point of rarefaction and refinement that scenography became tinged with tongue-in-cheek wit and modernist aesthetics with more than a touch of uncanniness. Taking the spoon-to-a-city philosophy of modern architecture almost ad absurdum, the architect designed virtually everything in the building, from the candlesticks and ashtrays, condiment holders and cutlery, glassware, vases, furniture, light fixtures, curtains, bedding, carpets, clocks, phone booths, door handles, and display cases, down to the typeface for stationery and signage, and even the airport buses. The effect, however, was less that of regimentation and absolutistic logic than the conjuring of an aesthetic world in which, as in the microcosm of a theater, subjectivity and self-presentation were called into question, and every object and relationship defamiliarized, reconstituted, and made an invitation to a new way of seeing. From this perspective, the original name, Hotel Globe, evoking both Shakespeare's theater and the and the increasing transitoriness of late modern life would probably have been more apt than Royal Hotel, which circa 1960 could only have had an anachronistic ring of monarchism. We may characterize the architectural world of SAS as one of magic rationalism. The theme of totality in relation to modern architecture has not yet received the careful theoretical reflection it deserves. On the one hand, the Wagnerian idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, which reached its apogee in Art Nouveau architecture, was a romantic flight into otherworldliness and fantasy. It betrayed a longing on the part of the turn of the 20th century culture for wholeness and harmony at a moment when industrialization and urbanization were inexorably fracturing and fragmenting the bourgeois life world. Architecture's recourse to fluid and plant-like forms, its will to transform cold, hard ironwork into flower-like ornaments, was symptomatic of the fears society harbored vis-a-vis the alienating, disintegrating forces of modernity. In this 1898 interior by Joseph Ulbrich for the Villa Friedman, for example, the obsession with fluidity and organicism verges vertiginously on the pathological. Adolf Loos was among the rare architectural intellectuals to attack this Jugendstil preoccupation with total design, branding his Viennese contemporaries both escapist and tyrannical. These are letter openers by Joseph Hoffman. In a parable of the poor rich man, written in 1900, Loos satirically portrayed a wealthy client who became a prisoner of architecture when his architect designed everything in his domestic environment, leaving nothing untouched down to the man's bedroom slippers. Yet paradoxically, the abstract rationalist logic that superseded this compensatory naturalism a quarter of a century later was hardly less totalizing in its vision. Ludwig Hilbersheimer's 1923 project for a Wohnstadt, a residential city, a direct response to Le Corbusier's Ville Contemporaine of the year before, remains a polemical but highly ambivalent statement. The new dominant doctrine of functionalism, forged from the German Werkbund to the Bauhaus and the New Frankfurt, and then codified by the International Congresses of Modern Architecture, the SCI-Arc, subscribed to the belief that the architect should take charge of the lived environment at every scale of operation, literally from the spoon to the city. No less a symptom than the earlier Art Nouveau, it reflected a compulsive desire to gain control over the processes of modernization and to counteract the anarchy of the capitalist marketplace by means of a systematic logic of planning and a science of good design. Jacobsen's magic rationalism represents a late convergence of these two fundamentally contradictory, but nonetheless deeply entangled ideas of totality. Functionalist sublime. Undoubtedly, the most magical public space in the SAS building was the Winter Garden. Tucked behind the levitational spiral stair in the ground floor lobby, Jacobsen originally conceived it as a kind of palm court with wicker lounge chairs in the English manner. But in the course of its development, it took on a different inspiration, more Misesian perhaps, as may be seen in another preliminary drawing. And here, we could see a kind of complete atmospheric inversion of the austerity of Mises' project of the early 30s for a marble-clad war memorial in the Neue Wache in Berlin. Ultimately, Jacobsen created a double-height, near-square room with a gridded ceiling of opalescent glass panels and double glass walls veiled from the rest of the lobby by diaphanous curtains. On two facing sides, Between the sandwich of glass planes, he immured 3 round white columns, and among these columns, he suspended more than 100 varieties of orchids, creating a 3-dimensional wallpaper of hovering plants. At the center of this glassed-in garden was a seating area where Jacobsen's thin steel-legged pot armchairs, upholstered in chartreuse wool, surrounded low rosewood veneered tables. A room within the larger room of the hotel lobby, inside a building that was conceived as a city within the city. The hermetic winter garden had an aquarium-like atmosphere, reminiscent of 19th century glass-roofed arcades, such as those elegized by the surrealist writer Louis Aragon in his novel Paris Peasant, and then taken up by Walter Benjamin in his Arcades project, his great unfinished magnum opus. Spaces of an architectural urban dream world, symbolizing for Benjamin the passage of an older way of life into industrial modernity. The other public areas of the hotel lobby, overall totaling about 70 square meters on 2 floors, were likewise characterized by intricately layered spaces and optical thresholds, and mixed craft and industrial materials. These range from the suite of fashionable shops and stalls along the building's ground floor perimeter, deploying a system of demountable wall panels and vitrines, to the snack bar visible through the winter garden, physically entered through a swinging glass door. Subdivided into a counter area and a sit-down space, the snack bar interior was further partitioned with oak slat screens. On the second level, the stair and elevators detached into other seating areas, including a discreetly dark rosewood paneled lounge with Jacobsen's standing lamps and recessed perimeter lighting, and alcoves containing his swan couches and writing desks. That slide again, I see what it's reflecting. Directly above the first floor snack bar and adjacent to the overlook into the winter garden was the intimate Orchid bar. And finally, at the other end of the floor, behind another large transparent wall modulated by a hand-woven, oops, sorry, I got behind myself here. That's the Orchid bar. At the other end of the floor, behind another large transparent wall modulated by a hand-woven curtain, was the hotel's formal restaurant with its 3 dining rooms. Hotel guests could get tantalizing glimpses of the restaurant's fine appointments and its 16 domed skylights. The aura of surreality that suffused SAS's interiors was heightened by the interlacing of synthetic and natural materials, industrial and artisanal products, which seemed to reinforce the building's foreignness in mid-20th century Copenhagen. It was as if the vision of the building had somehow preceded its mode of production. While permeated with references to the natural world, the hotel thus remained an entirely artificial realm, an aestheticized or exoticized nature exemplified by tropical woods, orchids, and other rarities. This observation leads us back to Walter Benjamin and the distinction he famously draws between handicraft and machine technology in his essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, written in 1935. The painter is to the cameraman, Benjamin writes in a very well-known passage, as the magician or shaman is to the surgeon. While the shaman undertakes to cure diseases by a mystical laying on of hands, the surgeon cuts into the body with a scalpel, exposing its underlying condition. Paradoxically, though, the surgeon requires technological instruments to perform his operation. Indeed, Benjamin continues, mechanical equipment has penetrated so deeply into reality that its seemingly pure aspect, freed from the foreign substance of equipment, is the height of artifice. In other words, in a world mediated by ever more sophisticated types of technology, the direct apprehension of reality is an increasing or ever vanishing prospect. The sight of immediate reality, Benjamin concludes, has become an orchid in the land of technology. The environment that is so technologically mediated, enhanced, augmented, has replaced the possibility of any other kind of experience. Grand Hotel Abyss. We suggested at the outset that the SAS building represents the swan song of late modernism, and not only because of its famous chairs and its location in the city of Hans Christian Andersen's Ugly Duckling. With its rigor tempered by lyricism and even humor, with its formal exorbitance and its faux naturalism, with its wittily posed publicity photos, SAS turned rationality into performance, exposing the unreality and constructedness of modern life and of the everyday objects we take as second nature. At SAS, familiar things are estranged, transformed into beautiful fetishes, special effects, constructed situations. The enchanted world of SAS is one that we finally have to wake up from, like an opium dream, like a movie, like a hotel guest who at last has to check out. The hotel is a privileged topos that runs through a long line of 20th century literature. At times, it has served as a symbol of the homelessness and deracination of contemporary life, with the modern tourist a kind of consumer culture version of the wanderer or vagabond in earlier literature. The lobby space in particular has been freighted with metaphoric meanings, whether portrayed as a place of rendezvous for erotic intrigues and assignations, or as a seat of boredom and anomie. This modernist topos reaches, as I said, a kind of denouement in Copenhagen circa 1960. SAS's period elegance and glamour brings us to the very threshold of the Grand Hotel Abyss, a beautiful hotel, Georgi Lukács, a German critic and theorist, writes, a beautiful hotel equipped with every comfort on the edge of an abyss of nothingness, of absurdity. Or of another German critic, Siegfried Krakauer's essay, The Hotel Lobby, where he writes, in tasteful lounge chairs, a civilization intent on rationalization comes to an end. But perhaps closest of all to Jacobsen's heterotopian poetics at SAS, and very possibly directly inspired by them, is Jacques Tati's 1967 film, Playtime. While Tati's ingenious film set, dubbed Tativille, has been widely celebrated, actually I think I want to have that up. While Tati's ingenious film set, dubbed Tativille, has been widely celebrated, the connection to Jacobsen has never been suggested before to my knowledge, and I have no conclusive evidence to prove it. But Tati made several trips to Scandinavia in the early 1960s, where his films were enthusiastically received, and he may well have visited the SAS building shortly after it opened. He or his set designer, Eugène Roman, may also have seen the full-scale mock-up of a prototype SAS hotel room displayed in the exhibition Scandinavian Forms at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris in late 1958, with its blown-up photo montage of the building model, complete with facade reflections and clouds. In Tati's brilliant comic satire on glass architecture, the self-same building morphs and reproduces interchangeably from an airline terminal into a hotel, an office building, a trade fair hall, a housing block, a drugstore snack bar, and a restaurant called the Royal Garden. If you know the film, and I hope that many of you do, you cannot fail to note the resemblances to many of the images I've shown tonight. From the opening shot of a glass high-rise vacuously mirroring the clouds in an all but vanished Paris, Playtime appears a further imaginative transposition of Jacobsen's magical evocation of New York in Copenhagen. And here we have SAS, and here we have Tati's Paris, and here we have SAS, and here we have Tati's Paris, and here we have Arne Jacobsen in a photo by Julius Schulman. Thank you very much.